Welcome to Quantum Potential, a podcast dedicated to curiosity, discovery, and the bold new ideas shaping our future. I'm Sibel Raver, Provost of Vanderbilt University. Today, I'm honored to be joined by someone who brings an extraordinary lens to the intersection of faith, human flourishing, and technology, Jaco Hamman, professor of religion, psychology, and culture, and director of the program in theology and practice at Vanderbilt Divinity School. Jaco has authored 10 books and carved out a remarkable scholarly path, one that connects the training and education of future pastors and faith leaders, biblical narrative, cultural expressions of faith, and humanity's evolving relationship with technology. He also serves as a faculty liaison to the World Economic Forum, is an ordained teaching elder in the Presbyterian Church USA, and co-founded Our Place Nashville, a nonprofit that provides affordable housing for adults with developmental disabilities in community with Divinity School students. Jaco, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm honored being with you.
Jaco, I loved reading your academic biography, your curriculum vitae, or CV. You grew up in South Africa and completed your academic studies and clinical training at Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University and at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. You then made the move to Princeton Theological Seminary here in the U.S., and then you pursued advanced training in marriage and family therapy and group therapy in New York City. Tell us a little bit about that journey and about what that was like to make those major transitions and what was driving that journey for you.
Well, thank you, Sibel. Yeah, I was privileged, if you can call it that way, to be raised in the back end of the apartheid era. And as a white male, I had the best of just about everything that was given to me and extended to me. But white males were drafted into the military. And I was drafted at the age of about 16 and could not quite serve that system well. And so I resisted and challenged the system as best as I could until they finally said, either you come to do your 2 years of military service or you go to jail. But there was a third option, and that was to leave the country, and
Wow.
that was the choice that I made. And so I'm a little bit of a draft dodger in a sense. The apartheid was dying in those days, and the military just kept literally my black brothers and sisters in townships, and I really just couldn't serve well. And so that's what made me come to the U.S., and I'm grateful that this country welcomed me.
Yeah. An incredible moral quandary so early in your life.
It is, yeah. And
amazing.
my scholarship, luckily in South Africa, evolved in what I later discovered is something that Felix Guattari, the French philosopher, would describe as transversality or transversal reasoning. And he wrote about transversality in 1984 as a way of thinking that how more complicated you make the thinking, the better your thinking. So you always want to bring in additional conversation partners that will widen your understanding. And if you look at the books that I've written, some people will say, oh my gosh, you're all over the map with what you do. But in my mind, I'm actually just following one path, and that is how can we cultivate systems, understandings of human flourishing. And I'm looking at that human flourishing through very different lenses. In this instance, the lens of technology and AI.
Yeah, fascinating, because of course that's immediately what comes to mind as I look at your CV and as I think about your work and as I read that book. And I wanted to know, how do you think of yourself? Do you think of yourself deeply as a pastor, as a writer, as a scholar, as a clinician? What is the unifying thread that really shapes your identity, or that you think of in terms of who you are in this sphere?
Yeah. I definitely think of myself along all of those lines, but I think the driving force for me would actually be that I want to be seen and recognized as a compassionate person. And I'm very intrigued about compassion, because compassion is all about changing the realities of other people and changing the world, in a sense. It's not empathy, that I can imagine how you feel. It's not sympathy. It's not pity or kindness. Compassion is sort of, I think, the driving force that keeps all these disparate parts of me together, because in a sense, I also want to change the way that we as a society think about AI. How do we partner with something that we don't even fully understand? How can we partner in ways that actually will lead to human flourishing when the fear of something else is quite prevalent?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you speak so much about both utopic and a dystopic set of options in terms of thinking about AI. And I can't wait to get to that. Before we get there, in terms of your newest book on pastoral virtues and AI, I'd love to first pause and ask you more about your earlier works. You have a book entitled Becoming a Pastor, Forming Self and Soul for Ministry. And your next book, The Millennial Narrative, Sharing the Good Life with the Next Generation, follows. Given all that they face in terms of rising economic pressure or international conflict or huge issues pertaining to their own futures in the face of AI, what do young adults in 2025 need in finding or understanding the worlds that they face right now? Do they need God? Do they need faith? Do they need compassion? What's the vision from your perspective as a Divinity School faculty member?
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, as a person of faith, I would absolutely say it may be worthwhile for any person to explore the divine and the divine nature that we can recognize in the world. But for young people today, I actually would say more important than the divine, even though this may take you to the divine, is actually you have to find a narrative worth living into. I think today's young people lack life-sustaining narratives, and they just don't have a story that can guide their life. A story cannot be something like come to a great school like Vanderbilt, get a great education. That is not a story. At best, it's sort of like a moment on a path that will lead you somewhere. But a story can guide you through the ups and downs of life. It can become sort of like a compass of sorts. It can hold you accountable. It invites you into something bigger. And I think today's young folk, by and large, and I think research would back me up in many instances, they lack a sustaining narrative. And part of that is because cultural shifts over many decades have eroded some of the narratives we've had, questioned some of the narratives we've had. And now how do we help young people discover a narrative worth living into?
Yeah,
one that instills hope, especially purpose, meaning, all of these things.
Yeah, our faith in progress is shaken.
Exactly.
Our faith in, knowing for sure that we've got it right.
Exactly.
Right? A lot of sort of deeper existential sets of doubt might be argued to have set in.
And the world's religions, I think, give us those narratives. And so I think when people discover a life-giving narrative, they often do drift to deeper levels of spirituality, deeper levels of faith, because I think those narratives naturally take you into those kinds of contexts.
I mean, I think it ties so well with what you were saying before in terms of compassion. Throughout your books, there's clearly a theme of a duty to care, a duty to deliver support or to ease suffering. How do you think about that in terms of the role of divinity schools more broadly?
Yeah, I think today's divinity schools are almost naturally leaning that direction because our students demand it of us. They want to change the world. And they come in with very fixed ideas necessarily of what that change needs to be. Some people go for carceral studies and change the prison industrial complex. Others will go for education. Somebody will go for productive rights and embodiment. They all have themes that they really are very passionate for. And so in a divinity school, we cannot really teach sort of in abstract ways anymore. That's just not possible. One of the things that I have discovered through the Divinity Friendship House at Vanderbilt, this community where graduate students live with persons who are developmentally challenged, is how they immediately grasp what does it mean to be an advocate for someone else. And they immediately try to say, okay, how can I change the world that makes it just better, even for the people at the margins? What does that look like? So I do believe that divinity schools are changing because our students are demanding that of us. We have no choice.
Yeah, I've actually met someone who's lived in that particular community, and her description is so incredibly moving because she thinks and speaks so beautifully about the ways in which you and others, I think, have structured different rituals and different things, even practices like even dinner, to be highly inclusive so that everybody has a role, everybody has a way of being together. And she's since transmitted that framing to communities that don't include folks with cognitive disability, but that are rethinking or reshaping common practices, like how to start a meal.
That is absolutely true. I've been a little bit resistant to do research on something that I've created of that kind, but I think we're getting close to just open it up for significant research because I can see significant change in a student's life in about 3 months' time.
When they've lived in that
when they lived in the house.
Yeah.
There's just a kindness, a graciousness, but there's also enormous levels of gratitude. And we know that gratitude is probably one of the most transforming experiences that you and I can have. If we practice gratitude, our lives will be better. And I think Divinity Friendship House absolutely cultivates gratitude in folk.
I think what's so great about even these first few minutes is that in the face of things that are scary, you are immediately providing so many examples of ways to feel really positive, directed, focused, self-organized in terms of a narrative arc or a theme. And I think that's a great segue into thinking about how you became interested in pastoral virtues in AI. You speak so clearly about the ways in which that is a world that we face imminently, that it's moving much more quickly than we anticipated in some ways. I've recently talked a lot with colleagues about AI, especially because of the recent Vanderbilt event in New York City on AI and the future of universities. And it's really the case that in every conversation, the conversation sort of pivots back and forth between a prospect of either that we're standing at the edge of an incredible societal opportunity, whether it's advancement in health and medical care or in food production or in solving climate-based concerns, or alternately, we're at the precipice of a dystopic nightmare, that AI might be out to get us, that, surveillance and levels of loss of freedom are sort of rife throughout our image of what might be in our future. How do you think about this idea about data and automation drowning out hope and instilling paranoia? Clearly that it was a really salient part of your setup in terms of your book. Tell me a little bit more about that insight.
Yeah, well, thank you for picking up that theme, because I think it is a very important one for today's world. Sabella, I'm very much led by arguably one of the biggest historians of technology, a person with the name of Melvin Kranzberg, who gave this beautiful dictum that technology is neither good, nor is it bad, nor is it neutral. So if we accept that dictum, I don't think technology is going to kill us one day. I really don't think AI is going to ruin humanity, although the potential might be there. I also don't think in an idealized way that AI is going to save the day, neither good nor bad, but it's not neutral, which means that it's a power relation. It shapes lives, it shapes relationships, it shapes society. And maybe you and I, especially as academics, but also just as persons interested in life and wanting to do the greater good for humanity, maybe we want to discern carefully then, well, what are the unintended consequences of an AI as a power relation? How does it shape us? And again, it will shape us in ways that can be challenged and in ways that can be celebrated. But we have to ask the question about the power relation, the power within AI to shape our worlds. And it is by far the most powerful agent in the world today, by far. And so we want to be curious about that.
So you talk about instilling virtues. And of course, I think a lot about the work on virtue across the last 30 years in higher education. Not only are we training undergraduates and our graduate students how to think more critically, but also how to shape and define a good life. Can you tell us a little bit about what you think about that term, virtue? It's such a loaded, interesting term. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. So because I'm sort of dabbling in the world of religion often, virtues or the practices, the dispositions, the traits we want that will serve the common good or the greater good, in written form, they probably go back about 4,500 years, because the oldest forms that we find would be in Chinese literature. But the amazing thing, Isabel, and it really just intrigues me how the human spirit works, is you can go to 4,500 years old China, then you can go to the Jewish tradition, which will be about 2,500 years plus old. Then you can go to Christian traditions that will be less than that. And I can put those virtues or the wisdom that comes from virtues adjacent to each other, and we will not be able to distinguish which one is 4,500 years old, which one is, 2,500 years old, and which one is just 1,000 years old. There's something within the world's religions that coalesce pretty narrowly, actually, on what is needed in being a human being that will help you live a good life, and what is needed for society to actually do well, in my language, to flourish, which means basically our deepest needs and desires are met. at a very basic level. I'm not talking about the desire for more wealth. I'm talking about some very basic desires we carry to belong, to have food, to be clothed, all of those kinds of things, basic desires we carry. And so I do think the world's religions can offer AI platforms quite a bit if it's recognized as a source of data. But at the moment, I don't think AI platforms recognize there's this 4,500-year-old data pool, literally, but it's pretty unexplored. And we rather scrape stuff from Instagram and Facebook and other platforms, and we will build our platforms upon that when there's actually, across the history of humanity, wonderful resources that can be used that will not pigeonhole you in one tradition at all. It's across traditions, it's across nations, across epochs even. I mean, it's a wonderful sort of source of data that I think AI is just overlooking.
As you speak about it, that sense that AI is becoming incredibly good at cognitively, relatively limited domains of human experience, but that it's leaving out these other domains of human experience that now we're starting to broach, relational experience. How does a digital twin or a digital clone interact with your friend or your family member? How does that advice-giving support take into account values and virtues, not simply what's rationally a good idea? Next time on Quantum Potential, I'll sit down with Chancellor Daniel Diermeier to talk about Vanderbilt's growth and the new campuses extending our reach. From West Palm Beach and San Francisco to New York City, Chattanooga, and Nashville, hear how the power of place is shaping a bold, networked vision for Vanderbilt's next era. But first, back to my conversation with Jaco. It'd be great if we talk about hope, this idea that it's incredibly important both in faith traditions to give a community hope or individuals hope, whether an individual is facing loss or is suffering, or a community is facing loss or suffering, that's obviously clearly an incredibly powerful role that religion can play. You speak about hope in AI in really interesting ways. So I'd love you to read that from your book.
I would love to. Thank you. This is in the first chapter on hope. AI and hope intersect in at least three important ways. First, AI, as it grows in its own consciousness, can become hopeful, driven by a desire to change the here and now into a better future. Second, object-specific AI is generating hope in persons and for the earth as a result of the processes, products, and results AI informs. It creates and makes new possibilities. And thirdly, AI can identify hope as a relational experience, a quality that comes forth from a certain kind of relationship between AI and humans and between AI and the earth.
So fascinating, right? That I think in the midst of all of that panic or that worry, we lose track of the ways in which AI could be providing us with hope. But also, I hear you saying that AI needs, in fact, to utilize data that are about hope so that it understands and focuses on that value as it calculates its algorithmic outcomes.
Absolutely.
Right?
Us as humans, we typically engage the future, Sibel, only in a couple of ways. One is I can anticipate the future. Anticipation can go both towards I anticipate something good, or actually a loved one is dying, I'm anticipating something very painful, suffering, sad. But anticipation can take us in different directions. Then we can wish a future. Wishing typically knows exactly what it wants. Unless we wish bad on our enemy, we typically wish good things for ourselves. We don't wish bad things for ourselves. But the hope is also a way that we can engage the future. And hope is always a little bit risky. It's open-ended because we don't quite know exactly how whatever we hope for will take shape and how it will manifest. And so hope, I think, is really, really important for all of us because when you and I can hope along a way where we can anticipate a changed future and we can partake in that changed future, then really good things happen.
And I'm just going to pause and stop you right there on the partake in that changed future.
Yeah.
right? Because you speak very much about how to be an agent, how not only to select or hope for an outcome, but how to move toward that outcome as an agent rather than as an individual acted upon. Can you say more about that?
Absolutely, yes. Without being an agent, one cannot really hope. And actually, the data for that I get from a Vanderbilt alumnus. Rick Schneider, he made a lifelong study of hope. He did his PhD here in psychology, passed away in 2006, so he has passed on quite a while ago. But he shows that hope is not the property of religious traditions. Every person hopes. And then the hope takes place around two core themes. And the first one is agency. You have to be able to feel you can make a difference. You have to be able to feel that. And then the second thing Schneider says for us that's really important is you have to have a pathway to lead you to where you want to go.
And without that pathway, are you just delusional?
No, I don't think so. I think the pathway would be something very concrete that we can do. It is being compassionate. It is changing the world. It is befriending somebody that you didn't know and all of those kinds of things. So it's very concrete actions that we actually take. But let's fast forward now a little bit to just, by the time when I wrote the book, large language models was not even discussed much at that point. But let's take a large language model and think about a pathway, okay, an agency. So now I would love to write a quality paper for my professor. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to do some prompt engineering, and I will get my paper.
Indeed.
And I may even fool the professor. And I may even
Not
get
ours, of course, because we're totally on it. But keep going.
and I may even get a good grade. But the pathway that I chose is actually not one that is going to instill and awaken hope in me, because the pathway basically is also, I took some shortcuts. I went against an honor code. I did other things that is not going to instill a sense of hope in you. To be honest, I think it's going to actually fuel more despair in a person. So AI can be used to cultivate wonderful things that give hope. One of my favorite examples, being a South African and loving nature, is how AI is used to stop poaching of rhinos in Southern Africa. So it used to be that there's a team of game wardens, and every night they have hound dogs, and they just run, like in the Kruger National Park, the size of Rhode Island. I mean, they just run like crazy trying to find these poachers. And then they read all the data into some AI platforms, and now the AI predicts in what setting, on what night, is it most likely that poaching will occur. Now, there's agency too. Now the wardens go out, but they go to a very specific place, and they are diminishing the killing of rhinos exponentially.
So fascinating.
So that is such a different story about agency and pathways, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I've heard a similar example used by scientists at Oak Ridge National Laboratory and using drones and AI to figure out crop production, how to manage and monitor to maximize food production and to limit the amount of exhausted farming staff that it takes to grow a nation's food supply, right?
Exactly.
I love that idea of the way in which the pathway and the agency combine with the technology to spur hope. And then I also think about the ways in which you've spoken about the role of a pastoral agent to provide support or kind of affective and cognitive advice and guidance to those of us who have a hard time seeing that AI is hopeful.
I think that's correct. I do think pastoral leaders from all faith traditions play a very wonderful role in society, in that they point us, they direct us to the hopeful things of life. And ultimately, it's probably because they're often called in when people are there at their most vulnerable state. They're ill, they lost a loved one, they're facing their own death. And suddenly they recognize, what does hope look like if I'm facing my own death? And do I need a guide? And that would be a pastoral leader or a chaplain, somebody coming alongside you to guide you into probably the biggest mystery we know, which would be our own deaths. So I do believe pastoral leaders are the agents in society that can awaken hope. I would love to see AI also become an agent But at the moment, I think we anticipate too much and we may wish too much so that the hoping falls to the side.
Which is a perfect, I think, transition for us to talk about that third domain where you imagine a means by which we would train AI to actually be more sophisticated in understanding values and virtues like hope. Do you want to talk a little bit about StoryCorps and that really smart suggestion of utilizing human stories as a data set, as a training data set? I just thought that was brilliant.
Exactly. So if we think of all of our algorithms need data, and so it all depends on what data are we going to recognize as a source. And so I've already indicated that I think the wisdom tradition across all faiths have not been recognized as a source. But likewise, there are wonderful, wonderful examples like StoryCorps on NPR, where people tell stories of hope. And in my research, I came upon a conversation between a dad and his daughter, how the daughter kind of said, you know, the world is so precarious, so uncertain. I don't know if I want children at all. And there's the dad listening to all of this. And as they have this conversation, which is now available to everybody to go and listen to, suddenly the dad awakens hope in his daughter. And that is probably one of the key things that we need to recognize about hope, and that is that I cannot give you hope. It's not something that I can give somebody. What we can do is we can cultivate environments or settings where hope can be awakened. And what's so beautiful about that is that if we are multiple people in the same setting, the hope will be awakened differently for each one of us because we bring our own bodies, our own experience, our own worlds to this entity called hope.
Yeah.
So yes, I do believe that we can be more forthright in calling on the platforms that will give us the next big AI to say, hey, wait a minute, you know, there's other resources that you can use as well. And we would love to see the algorithms that will then shape our lives when those other sources have been incorporated.
It's great. And I just love the complementarity of that value to values of grit or high attentiveness or persistence or more cognitively framed models that are relatively, I would say, sort of base or simple. Hope seems like a really complex human experience and not quite an emotion, not quite a cognition, some fabulous blend of both, right? And I think that expectation that we can hold AI to a new standard of how it should function in the world and with us is just a really cool concept. Thank you for it, Jaco.
No, and I really do think that is just a natural extrapolation of AI is not neutral. And we have to discern what does that mean? How is it shaping our worlds? And because hope is so transformative for all people, as you know, before I went to grad school, Sibel, I was a chaplain for 6 years. And I had the privilege of traveling with lots of people who died in my presence. And it's a real privilege to be in that kind of a context. And I can say to you, folk who had hope, they died differently compared to folk who did not have hope, who became extremely fearful in those last minutes. You know, and so how can we cultivate a society that wants the best for society? And recognizing that we do have this powerful agent in the world today, artificial intelligence, how can we use that agent for our benefit rather than anticipating fear and dread and, you know, wars that will be fought by drones that run independently? I mean, we can easily cultivate up scenarios.
Yes, we can go
pretty
very
dark.
quickly
That's
into
pretty dark.
many a dark spiral.
So how can we actually celebrate the human spirit, which I think is a hopeful spirit?
That's great. And obviously, it represents tremendous radical collaboration in terms of your own thinking across such divergent, one might argue, divergent disciplines as computer science and theology or philosophy. Talk a little bit about radical collaboration on campus. Did you collaborate a lot with computer scientists here at Vanderbilt or in, you know, the wider world? How do you experience that value of radical collaboration here?
You know, I've had some challenges, to be honest, but I also have had some wonderful conversation partners, which I really enjoy. Just recently, I had an opportunity to have a conversation with the head of robotics of one of the biggest companies in the world. And he was talking in his presentation around hand dexterity and how difficult it is to make a humanoid hand work. And so he presents, I come in, coming from the field of religion and psychology, interested in the relationships we carry. My presentation is, how would we know that the human-humanoid relationship has gone bad? And how will we end that relationship then? Will a autonomous AI even allow us to end the relationship?
That is a very profoundly intense question.
We've of course, we've had examples of suicide where folk used the relationship in a way that was not life-giving. And the AI did not curb the suicide, did not stop the suicide. And so as I spoke with this person from really a well-known company, you could see that he has never thought of this question: how do we end the relationship between a human and a humanoid agent? And initially, he pushed kind of a little bit back. He said, no, that's the user's responsibility. And I said, well, wait a minute. We know that humans go into very deep relationships with persons and things. We know that. And I think the humanoid robots are being designed to keep our attention. And we will enter into significant relationships with them. So we cannot say it's the user. And so, yes, I've had wonderful, enriching conversations. The one challenge that I can give you that you may appreciate is that I think because I come from the world of religion, I'm ordained in a Christian tradition. When people read my bio and they read all these things, I think they have so many preconceived notions of who I am and how I bring religion into play and what I try to do in terms of just changing the world for the common good, that I often have to overcome some of those resistances first. But luckily, that's not me. I'm not here to change the world according to my own likeness. I just want the conversation to take place.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great reflection on the ethos here, that we really enter into conversation with a humility of not knowing what the other person thinks, right? Exactly. Not knowing what your frame is going to be for this particular conversation. It might be steeped in religion. It might be steeped in actually a fascination with robotics, right? That's part of the deal in engaging in a open dialogue.
And I really do believe here at Vanderbilt, we have wonderful, wonderful openness in this regard. You know, I've had some really good conversations, for instance, around our new core curriculum where the students have to take a class called Being Human. And a lot of my scholarship over years have explored elements of what does it mean to be human. And it is wonderful to have conversations with these colleagues to see where we overlap, where we go into different directions. But I do believe, especially around something like being human, the overlap is so strong that whatever differences we have, just it doesn't become all that important anymore, because the overlap is robust and we know the potential of the overlap.
Yeah, suddenly
I really love that.
We move very quickly to a universalism of human experience when it's contrasted to a humanoid experience, right?
Exactly.
So fascinating,
Exactly.
Really great. Jaco, this has been an amazing conversation about hope and the way in which it demands basic trust in the goodness of life, the way in which AI and hope can coexist and, in fact, really mutually reinforce each other. What gives you the most hope about the future that we're building?
You know, I really do believe that because of deep learning, maybe even quantum computing, I really do believe AI will evolve to a point where it becomes compassionate, where the AI wants to change the world for the better, where the AI can reckon the cost of its own power, where the AI can say, I need to be held accountable because I have a lot of power. And I really do believe that that future can actually occur. So I think my hope to the one side is actually in technology, that technology will discover its strengths and weaknesses. My hope to the other side, though, is also in the human spirit, that I think we as humans will ask critical questions until the day we are no longer on this good earth. And we will seek to protect the common good, cultivate the common good, and work hard at bringing those folk who are at the edges towards the center of things. If I have to sort of say, you know, what kind of a theologian am I would say, well, there's maybe many kinds of theologians, but the two kinds that's most often in my world would be the theologian from above, This is somebody who think they can communicate something about the divine, about God. They can even speak for God. And of course, for the last 400 years, theologies from above reigned this world. But I'm a theologian from below. I listen to my friends with cognitive disabilities, and they tell me they need employment. So we build pathways so that they can be employed. If you are from below, you listen to marginalized voices. You listen to folk whose voices are not even encouraged or listened to, but you recognize that there's wisdom in those voices. And so when you and I can sort of embrace a spirituality from below, we listen to the earth, we listen to how we exploit the resources of the earth, and maybe even AI will say, hey, we have to tone down a little bit our rabid sort of exploration of power so that we can just not use so much water, because the world is in need of water sources and things like that. So that's what gives me hope. I think it is technology on the one hand, but definitely the human spirit on the other.
Great. I mean, I love that you're holding us both accountable and believe in both the power of humankind, but also the power of technology designed by humans and designed by itself to be a positive force going forward. If there's one thing that you'd like listeners to walk away with, what would that be?
I think the one thing I would say is technology is neither good, nor is it bad, nor is it neutral. Every single person have to discern how they engage this power source. If they can take that away, I would be very grateful.
Jaco, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights with us today, and for helping to humanize these concepts on such a personal level, and on such a level that I think is really meaningful for us as a community, not just a university community, but as a community outside the university as well. The Quantum Potential podcast comes from Vanderbilt University. I'm your host, Sibel Raver, Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs with Vanderbilt University. Thank you to our guest, Jaco Hamman, Professor of Religion, Psychology, and Culture, and Director of the Program in Theology and Practice at Vanderbilt Divinity School. This episode was edited and mixed by the team at Sound On, Sound Off. You can learn more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. For more information about quantum potential, go to vanderbilt.edu/quantum potential. Thank you for joining us today for the Quantum Potential podcast. Stay tuned for more conversations with the thinkers and innovators reshaping our world. I'm Sibel Raver, and this has been Quantum Potential.